Good afternoon. Welcome to another series, another recording in the Bodies in Crisis. What is the heart of the matter series? This afternoon, I just want to go straight into the session about respiratory arrest in the adult person, and also, if we are able to fit it in this recording, we will introduce cardiac arrest. So what do I mean by respiratory arrest? In a nutshell, respiratory arrest is when we stop breathing. Respiratory, that is intake and expelling of air, i.e. oxygen, and arrest just means it has stopped, it has ceased. So what leads to the phenomena, the bodily crisis that we refer to as respiratory arrest? I want to talk about that. Now, don't just jump into this recording. If you haven't watched the previous recordings leading up to this point, then I would request that you quickly pause this and then go and watch those previous ones. We've got about 3 previous clips. Why do I want you to watch those previous clips? I'll give you 2 reasons. First reason is it gives you a background to what I'm going to be discussing in this session. Second thing is, it not only gives you a background, but it helps you see that in order to be effective in assisting somebody who is not well, who is going through a crisis of the body, you need to do it in an organized way. You know, one of the things that I have observed when there is a health emergency, whether at home or whether it's happened in a public place or even in the clinical areas, and I've been part of all these 3 settings, is that there is a lot of pressure build-up that makes the individuals who are involved in that scenario easily giving to activity, some of which is not very logical or rational. That means we let our sense of how urgent the situation is dictate to us, rather than taking a reflective, logical approach to solve the problem. And this applies in all life incidents. When something happens, there is a tendency, first of all, to just react to the situation rather than taking stock of the situation and responding. Now, if you haven't made sense of what I've just said, don't worry about it. I'm going to reiterate this point as I go on. So when I'm talking about respiratory arrest or cardiac arrest in the adult person, well, so to give you a little background to what I said in the previous recordings, when you are faced with a person who has a health need or a health emergency, especially if it's life-threatening, and you are assessing them, one of the first things that you need to do is to determine whether the environment where they are is safe, because you don't want to go helping them in an environment which is hazardous and end up being a casualty yourself. Now, the other thing is, you really need their help. You really need to determine the degree of severity. I mean, you need to have an idea of what is happening. So it's just common sense that you try to determine that by seeing how responsive they are. Are they conscious? Are they breathing? But you start by determining from a response. And I went into quite a bit of detail in the previous clips. Now, the next thing you want to do, which is number one priority, is you want to make sure that their airway, they are breathing. Okay? Because if they are not breathing, if they stop breathing, then that is your number one emergency, because they are not receiving oxygen in their circulatory system. They are not receiving oxygen supplied to their vital organs, very likely. And if somebody stops breathing within 3 to 4 minutes, they would, if somebody has not been breathing for 3 to 4 minutes, they would have had a respiratory arrest. So then you are moving on to a cardiopulmonary situation, cardiac and respiratory. So you want to look at the first 3 to 4 minutes of assessing somebody. You want to make sure that you spend as brief time as possible. And in the previous clip, I mentioned the 10 seconds check of looking, trying to see what you can see, whether they are chest movements. They are having chest movements, which is indicative of the fact that they are breathing, they are taking in air and they are expelling air. And then you want to listen to the breath sounds. And then you want to feel that it's actually being expelled. They're not just taking a deep breath, they are actually expelling air. So that is the background that we arrived at in the previous clips. So having arrived at that, we also talked about the fact that you have to make sure fundamentally that the airway is not obstructed. And by that, you want to look at the fact that in their posture, their tongue is not blocking the airway. And if the tongue is blocking the airway, you do a thin lift. You lift up their chin, and so just tilt it back, tilts their chin, lifts their chin back, and make sure that the airway is not obstructed by the tongue. Also, even if it's unobstructed and they are still not breathing, you want to rule out that they don't have a solid obstructing their airway, and there might be a liquid obstructing the airway. Now, in a lot of cases, you determine that very quickly. But you want to make sure that within 10 seconds of looking, listening, and feeling, if they are not breathing and you've checked, you tilted the chin lift, and there is no, they need to be breathing within the 10 seconds that you've checked. If they are not, and you've done the tilted chin lift, tilted neck and chin lift, and they are still not breathing and there's no obstruction to the airway, you then go ahead to begin what we call CPR, okay, cardiopulmonary resuscitation. So before we go further, just to jog your memory, I want to show you a little picture here, illustration here. So this is something I got from one of my children, and it's very, very handy. It came in a book, so with a book. So just to give you an idea, and I hope you can see that quite clearly. So you've got the human skull here, which has got the brain. So we started in our assessment to determine whether there is a life-threatening emergency. There's a brain injury. We went through all that in previous clips. Then we moved to the upper respiratory tract. So we looked at the nasal passage, the nasal pharyngeal. So oral is the mouth, nasal is the nose, and then you've got leading to the sinuses. Then we've got from the back of the tongue, just joining the trachea, which is leading to the airway, the windpipe, and then branching to the digestive tract. At the point of branching is the esophagus. So we have gone through all that. And so the bit we are talking about now is in the thoracic cavity, the rib cage, the chest cavity. And in this chest cavity, you've got the bony structure. So you got the bone structure, which are the ribs. You've got towards the left side, you've got the heart. So you've got the heart, which is just there. And then you've got the sternum here. And you've got the diaphragm, which is muscular. And when you're taking a deep breath, you see the movement. So this is what happens. You've got something muscular here. And of course, going further down, you've got the stomach, and you've got behind it over here, you've got the two kidneys, and you've got the liver, etc. So that's just to refresh your memory. So here we are in a situation where we were able to get our patient or our casualty breathing by removing the obstruction in the airway, by unobstructing the airway. So what we then do is we keep them in a position where the airway is opened, and we do that, we call that the recovery position. Now, moving on to a casualty who is not breathing. There's no obstruction to their airway, nothing blocking their airway, and yet they are not breathing. So we know that if somebody is not breathing for 3 to 4 minutes, if they stop breathing, then we're looking at fatality in the eye. So what we want to do next is to start chest compressions. And we will go straight to chest compressions in the next clip. But before we do that, I just want to show you a little recording from YouTube just to illustrate the point. So just bear with me for a second. Okay, so I'm going to give you a little background. I'm just showing you a YouTube video of Chris Solomon's, somebody who works with the paramedics. And what you're going to be seeing very soon is a scenario in which this chap is actually going to be going into an emergency, cardiac emergency. He's at work, he's doing his work, and suddenly he realizes that he's not feeling very well. And within a short period, within a very short period, his condition deteriorates. And what before our very eyes, we just realize that suddenly he goes into respiratory arrest and then a cardiac arrest within a very short period. So that is what I wanted to show you as an illustration. He's at this stage telling his colleagues that he's not feeling very well. And so they are examining him, they are doing the assessment that, I was mentioning. They are examining him. They've done an ECG, electrocardiogram. They have looked at his heart rhythm, and they're looking exactly. They start with the top. They're looking at his head, the skin color. You can see that he looks flushed, and he's not very responsive. Yes, they're checking his response, and they've got it all happening. And so the assessment is ongoing. You don't actually just leave there. When you are doing an assessment at the lower respiratory tract, it doesn't mean that your eyes go off any changes in the head. You still maintain an overview of what is happening. So at this stage, they are checking him, and they've suddenly realized that he is losing consciousness. He's losing consciousness, and they have started cardiac resuscitation. They have started the compressions. So you can see how that happened very quickly. Now you can see in that picture that what they are focusing on is the airway and the heart. Just look at that image. And in fact, you can go back to YouTube, Chris Solomon, and you will see Chris Solomon's sudden cardiac arrest rescue. And you can see that for yourself. Okay. And on that note, I'm not going to leave it on a negative note. I just will keep this going until you can actually see that he's come back to life, because that he's been resuscitated, because that does happen. So at this stage, you've laid him flat on the ground, on the floor, very flat, because you need a flat surface, and he's not responsive. So what they have done is they have actually shocked him. They have actually given him a defibrillating and what we call automatic defibrillation. It's electric shock, just enough to kickstart his heart rhythm. And he is having, all this time they are giving him oxygen. They've kept his airway open. You can see that they've lifted his chin up, and they were giving him fluids. And by this time, you can see the difference. He is more responsive. He's coming around. Okay. And once he's stable, they start giving him. Yes, they really don't stop. They keep the care going, and once he's stable, they are going to transfer him to the hospital for further review, and that's what we're seeing. So at this stage, I am going to pause it, and we can just go back to what we were doing. Okay. Okay, so we have had a little glimpse of what really happens in an emergency. And usually the picture can be overwhelming because so many things seem to be happening. And a lot of people say, and I'm talking about nurses, clinicians, first aiders, say that when an emergency happens like that, they panic and they sort of forget these principles about what to do. And when this recording resumes, so in the next clip, I'm actually going to go through this very scenario, and I'm just going to talk about how you can keep focus on what to do in an emergency. So I'll speak to you soon, and thank you for listening. Bye-bye for now.